brain is absolutely ridiculous and one of the least understood aspects of the natural kingdom. We don't even understand how the brain of a worm works, so how on earth are we meant to comprehend our own evolved grey matter? Psychology has been officially studied for around 130 years and we're still making huge discoveries every year. My mum's a psychologist, so I grew up hearing about all this stuff and really took for granted some of the things I learned. So like any responsible millennial, I decided to start a podcast about it and share the sweet, sweet gift of therapy with the world. I'm sat on the couch with my mum, Sandy. She's a psychologist with over 20 years experience studying and treating clients. Hi, Mum.
Hi, Adam.
How we doing? Yeah. It's not awkward yet. We're going to release a new episode each week talking about a different aspect of mental health and therapy, and hopefully some of you will find it really useful. All of our episodes are going to be filmed and uploaded to YouTube. It's actually done quite nicely. We're sat on the sofas, we've got the fire going, so it's quite nice to watch us on YouTube if you want. If you also want to follow us on Instagram, it's @OnTheSofaPod. We've got a load more content coming there. Going to watch some TV shows with Mum and stuff and see what she thinks. And also give us a follow, give us 5 stars on iTunes, subscribe to us, do all those things because it helps more people reach us and we want to help as many people as possible. Last month we looked at like the basics of psychology and like how to find a therapist, what you can do to like prepare yourself. And now we're going to talk about like the 3 main methodologies or 3 really popular sort of treatments that are offered by psychologists. Obviously the first one we're going to cover is CBT, which is a massive buzzword. You know, everyone's having CBT, and what I really want to stress is that these aren't all going to suit everyone. CBT is really, really popular, and you know it's used a lot in the NHS because it's a proven technique, and the NHS has to use proven techniques because it's liable. It can't just use some experimental stuff, and that's why it's so popular. It doesn't mean that it's going to work for you. So do your research on it, and if you do start CBT with your therapist and it doesn't feel right and not much is going, it doesn't really relate to you very much, do say, and maybe consider something like ACT or different things that might work with you better. It's not the be all and end all.
But hopefully, if you followed the podcast, you wouldn't necessarily go to a CBT therapist. You'd sort of have worked that out a little bit.
Hopefully. Maybe CBT is going to be great for you.
Yeah,
you know, it does really, really work for sure. But
there's a lot of there are a lot of science. There's a lot of science behind CBT, and that's why it's sort of escalated. Yeah,
because I mean, as we said, psychology as a science is really new. I mean, it's studied by the ancients, but the first university was in 1880, I think. And so we haven't really got time, as the discipline has grown, to really deeply study these things in the same way as we have medicine. So that's why CBT is so foundational, because it has been studied for such a long time.
Yeah.
But that does make it quite archaic as well. And ACT is, I brought this up before, ACT is a methodology that I used in therapy, which was far better suited to me. And that's a little bit of a newer take on CBT.
CBT, yeah.
Anyway.
So today we're going to start with CBT, generally thought of as a short-term therapy using techniques to help individuals.
What do you mean short-term therapy?
So, I mean, it can be longer, but it's normally 6 to 12 weeks, maybe 20, but that would be
big piece of work.
And yeah, it's normally 6 to 12 weeks generally. They help the individual to change their thought patterns, their behaviour patterns, and in the hope that once these are challenged, etc., then their mood will increase.
Got you.
So that it's used widely to reduce stress, depression, and anxiety, to cope with complicated relationships, deal with grief, amongst many other symptoms. History of CBT, as you said, touched on psychiatrist Aaron Beck during 1960s. He believed that cognitions were a key to therapy.
Have you said what CBT stands for?
Cognitive behavioural therapy.
Okay.
So he was of the belief that the way that you think affects everything else. So if we can change the way that you think...
Do you mean that the way that you... like the voice inside your head, the way that you think?
Yeah. And the way that you perceive yourself, in thinking, affects everything else.
Okay.
And that was where he sort of began, really. And he said by changing the way a person thinks, then changes the way that they behave and also how they feel.
Okay.
I'm not sure it's as simple as that, but the pros of CBT, it can be fast and effective depending on the client and the presenting problem.
Okay. So what kind of problems react? Are you going to get onto this? I don't want to be...
No, so
what kind of problems
you've
are like
talked
really
before, like stress at work.
Okay.
Sudden onset stress at home, maybe. Early bereavement. Anything that's kind of really concurrent. That's just kind of here and now.
Okay. What's CBT not well suited to?
So I'll just finish about
No, sorry,
the pros,
I didn't
that's
interrupt.
right.
Crack on.
So it's highly structured and teaches useful and practical strategies
Okay.
that the client has then in their toolbox long after therapy's ended.
What do you mean highly structured?
So each session you'll go in and the therapist will say, let's review your homework.
Okay, so it's very homework based. There's a lot of
homework, and then it'll this session will be, today this is what we've agreed to discuss, maybe off the wish list or whatever. This is what we've agreed to discuss. Are you still okay with that? So it's although it's CBT, it's backed up with person-centered therapy skill base. But I'll go on to that in a minute.
Person-centered therapy is what we're going to talk about next week.
Yeah. So the cons of CBT, it may not be suitable for more complex mental health needs or learning difficulties.
Okay, why is that? Sorry to interrupt.
Because it requires a lot of structure, and if you can imagine somebody that has had a very, very chaotic life, maybe been in and out of inappropriate foster care homes and things like this, they might not have the ability. I'm not saying that people that have been in homes can't do this. I'm just saying sometimes their head is so chaotic they can't sit still for that long, or they can't stay focused for that long.
Yeah.
Somebody that's high on the autistic spectrum might like that structure, because they know, and they like structure. Week on week. Yeah, they know she's going to start with my review on homework. So it's all about what people have, the way the neurology is set up,
suits
really.
Different personality types.
Yeah.
Got you.
It does not address problems involving others that may be in the client's life, such as family members and their contribution to the client's problem. And it does not really address the possible underlying causes of mental health conditions. That's not to say that wouldn't come up, but CBT is very focused. If you start going down a different route, the therapist should bring you back if it's just pure CBT.
Okay, but then potentially certain therapists, you said you like using mixed methodology, so if someone decides to go off on a different route, it might be useful to explore that with them and leave CBT for a minute and go to something else to work through that.
Yeah, but bring it to their attention and say, I've noticed that you've brought this up, which takes us off the course for today, which is fine. I'm just highlighting to you that that's clearly important to you today. When is CBT useful? When there is a relatively new symptom that has been triggered fairly recently and is not an enduring problem. Now, some CBT therapists would disagree with me on that.
How come?
Because, and again, this is just my opinion, they basically use a technique called Socratic questioning. Socratic, and it takes you down to the core of the problem. So they do you do get to the core of the problem. You're just not going to stay there. Does that make sense?
I've got you. Whereas like certain therapies, like working through trauma potentially involves kind of an exposure therapy, whereas when you get to that point, you have to sit in that for a while and really relive that issue a few times to... Well, that's trauma therapy. That's something completely different. Okay. But CBT isn't designed to do that. CBT is designed to give you practical tools to deal with issues you face day to day. So what would a CBT session look like?
So if we stick with anxiety.
Anxiety is a really common one, yeah.
Yeah. It would be looking for what triggers, how you think about it, what behaviour that causes through the symptoms.
So how I'd be saying things like I feel really anxious to get out of bed in the morning. I really feel anxious when I have to talk to clients or talk to my friends, and I don't feel comfortable going outside and things like this. You'd be looking for...
So then you would... There can be a lot of drawing as well in CBT, which I think is quite useful. So you would start perhaps with their thoughts, because it is a lot. There's a lot of dependence on that. You know, the way that you think is blocking the way that you behave and is causing you symptomatology that's uncomfortable. So I would say to you, well, when did this start? And you'd say, I don't know, about 6 months ago. Okay, so what happened 6 months ago? And it's quite, I like the way it's structured like that. What happened 6 months ago? And you might say, I was involved in a bicycle accident.
This is a true story, by the way. I'm not anxious because of it, but I was involved in a bicycle accident.
And I'd ask you a little bit about that, and then I'd say, and did that stop you cycling?
Yeah.
Yeah. But you didn't have the bike anyway. But you would have been more nervous about getting on the bike. And what do you think about that day? What did you feel that day? What do you think about that day? Has it changed your behaviour? Yes, it has changed my behaviour. And I think I'm a bit nervous about going on those main roads now. So it's kind of
backtracking and then finding the source of the issue, and then tracing time forward and following the symptoms as long as we go.
And also that it would involve exposure work. So I would be saying, okay, well let's work with your thinking first. That was a one-off. It hasn't happened to you before. So should we try and reframe it as a one-off?
Yeah.
And I'm okay. I've fortunately survived it, had injuries, learnt from it. So we'd be pulling up all the things that you have learnt from it.
And this is all CBT?
Yeah.
So trying to not just reframe, but just to make...
It is reframe.
But to make you conscious of what you're saying to yourself day to day, and make you conscious of these beliefs that might be limiting you, and then giving you tools to manage them or change them over time, to change those habits ultimately, those thinking habits, to free you from those issues.
Those limiting behaviours.
Okay, so in that incident, I'm fine. Everybody, don't worry about it, I'm fine. But if someone came to you and said that they felt traumatised by that incident, hit by a car or whatever it is, by any incident, traumatised, could it be that actually you're not actually traumatised at all, but what's happened is you've become anxious about going outside, and then this, that and the other, and now you're really fearful of this happening again, but it's not traumatic? Do you, is trauma a buzzword that people know, oh, I've been traumatised by this, I've been traumatised by that, when actually it isn't that?
Yeah, I suppose you'd need to ascertain, is it actually trauma, or is that a word that they've picked up on? Yeah. Because
not trying to undermine anybody who has had traumatic experiences at all. I've had traumatic experiences for sure, but being able to label things not correctly but maybe more accurately might help you get to the root of the issue faster. Because if you were doing trauma therapy, like a more trauma focused therapy for that incident, maybe that wouldn't have sorted anything out. So it would have just made you very uncomfortable, because actually you're anxious because of other reasons. You're anxious, you're not traumatized, and you might be reliving this experience through the trauma therapy in your sessions, and that's just making you feel even more nervous, when if you were traumatized, it should help pack those. The way that trauma therapy works is you relive something and your brain sorts out those memories into less traumatic positions in the brain, so they're less triggering for you. If you're not traumatized and you're reliving something that's genuinely scary, you're just going to keep scaring yourself week after week, and it's not going to fix the issue.
No. And there is a thing called re-traumatization, so a therapist has to be really careful about that.
But do make sure that you self-diagnosing is not, I don't think it's a good thing to self-diagnose. Self-awareness is so important. Like, having an awareness of what's wrong is excellent, but please let a professional say, I think you're struggling with trauma, or I think you're struggling with chronic depression, or whatever it is, because as soon as you label yourself, it can cause you a lot of grief, because you start looking for symptoms that aren't there and other issues, and also it can guide the therapist in completely the wrong direction.
Yeah, that's true. So you use the word self-awareness, and I think I told you this, but a long time ago I did a piece of research that took a long time off my own bat that I wanted to find out, and that was, is there one common denominator in therapy that makes people better? Do you remember me telling you this? And I found it. Self-awareness. Right. When the client becomes more and more self-aware, they learn how to change things.
And they can notice these patterns of behaviour. Where do you cross the line into over-analysing? Because that isn't useful.
No, that isn't useful at all. And again, in CBT, that would come up.
Really?
So you've got like fortune telling, people that say, which they do, I'm going to have another really bad year this year. I'm never going to get anywhere in my career. That's fortune telling. And I would say to them, oh wow, are you like a fortune teller?
Sarky.
Yeah. Or have you got clairvoyant skills or whatever? Not taking the mickey out of any of those, because I love those types of people. But I'm catastrophizing. So that's another biggie. People can catastrophize. I'm never, ever going to find a partner.
Yeah. Or I'm always going to be abused in my relationship, or whatever.
So that's very CBT. Very useful.
Okay.
Very useful.
So CBT is a favourite because it works. It's quick.
It can work.
It's quick. It's proven. Like,
lots of science.
Great track record. It's scientific. It's probably not a great fit for things that have originated a long time ago and maybe a bit deeper and stuff. Counsellors use CBT a lot. Psychologists tend to use CBT. Psychiatrists probably don't use CBT.
I don't know. I think most therapists have got a knowledge in it.
Okay.
Not a lot of people don't use it.
Okay.
I wouldn't use it as a pure system orientation.
Definitely. So just be aware that CBT, as we've discussed, is great.
Yeah.
Really useful.
It is useful.
But not for everyone and not for everything. Make sure it's a good fit for you. And if your therapist suggests CBT and you're like, well, I listened to that podcast and they said that actually this might not be a good fit, raise it with them and see if they agree. Maybe they don't. Maybe we're chatting breeze, but I don't think we are.
Just do your own research.
Yeah, and make sure it is a good fit. CBT doesn't mean it'll definitely make you feel better.
No.
Cool. Next week we're going to look into, let me just look at my notes, person-centric therapy?
Person-centered
therapy, which is, well, you can tell everyone what it is briefly.
Yeah.
Very, like one sentence.
Okay, so again, it's very old, i.e. 100 and something years, and it was invented, if you like, by Carl Rogers, and it still exists a lot today.
It's like a talking therapy. Very common counselling. We're going to get into that next week. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Please go follow us on Instagram, subscribe on YouTube at On The Sofa Pod. Is it that?
Yeah.
Every time I say it, I think I've got it wrong. At On The Sofa Pod. Hope you enjoyed watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify, wherever you are. And yeah, we'll see you next week.
Okay.
See you in a bit.